The Riemann-Thomann model can help us better understand relationships and conflicts between people, and that's why it's an integral part of the Schulz von Thun toolbox. Today we will find out how it works. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung and today I'd like to present to you the Riemann-Thomann model. What is it all about? First of all, we have four forces that affect us, four needs we have, four directions in which we can strive. First of all, we have closeness. The need for closeness, for security in a relationship, in a group, to be part of a community. If I am single and I wish for a relationship, if I prefer teamwork above working alone, if I like to build personal relationships with my colleagues, all of this goes in this direction. There are also fears associated with it. The fear of abandonment and the fear of loneliness. Opposed to closeness, we have the need for distance, the need for independence, for autonomy, the freedom to distinguish myself as an individual. If I like to spend some time on my own, if I like to think things through myself before I discuss them with others, if I value professional relationships, this all goes in that direction. It is also associated with a sober, rational behavior because if I lean towards closeness, I might develop my ideas and opinions and decisions in conversation and in interactions with others. And in distance, I might focus more on numbers and data and facts. Here we have the fear of dependency, the fear of losing myself in the group, of losing my autonomy. Then we have the need for continuity, the need for permanence, for security, stability, commitment, and predictability. If I like to plan in detail before I do anything, if I focus on prevention and protection against risk, if I favor virtues such as punctuality, reliability, accuracy, if I like routine and the status quo, this all goes in that direction. And here we have the fear of uncertainty and insecurity, the fear of being at the mercy of chaos and chance. Opposed to continuity, we have change, the need for change, for variety, for the new and unknown, for adventure. If I like to try something new, to make new experiences, get involved in something new, if I like virtues such as flexibility and innovation and creativity, if I like taking a risk sometimes, this all goes in that direction. It is also associated with the colorful and lively and creative because towards continuity, behavior is supposed to be a bit more controlled, following rules such as etiquette and good behavior, and change can be a bit more wild and freaked out, such as if a small quarrel is turned into a big theatrical drama. Here we have the fear of being stuck in the same old well-trodden path, the fear of commitment and obligations and constraints. We have all of those four needs, but some of them might be greater than others. And we might not always be aware of those needs, because if a need is met, if a need is fulfilled, we will not recognize it. And if a need is fulfilled for a longer time, we might even forget it was there. Now we have this cross of axes and there are 4 quadrants, so we might we might feel like saying, oh well, maybe I am a closeness continuity type, or this other person is a distance type, so we might make up a simple personality typology here. And this is where things get a bit difficult. We discussed personality typologies in a separate video last week. To very briefly sum it up, those models are not based on proper scientific research. They are pretty much just made up. The tests used to identify your personality type usually does not meet scientific standards, and the whole thing pretty much only works thanks to a couple of biases and fallacies, especially the Barnum effect that we already discussed in a video. However, I have to say I do like the Riemann-Thomann model and I think it is a useful model. However, it is a bit in a gray area for me. It really depends on the specific application. It depends on what you do with it. If you focus on using it as some kind of personality model, personality typology, and focus on assigning traits and characteristics to those different directions, if you perform tests to figure out where you are in this cross of axes, there are tests for the Riemann-Thomann model, but again, they don't meet scientific standards. Then it goes into a problematic direction, then we drift into a problematic area. In regard to those characteristics assigned to the different directions, I had an interesting experience during my research when I read the different books. I will talk about them briefly later. In one of the books by Riemann, it was the people who lean towards a distance were described as missing the intermediate tones in conversations because they are not used to it so much and they have some trouble. In another book by Nico Fleisch, I will show it later, it's said about people who lean towards distance that they have a fine sense for the unsaid, which goes in a totally different direction. So you will notice if you focus too much on assigning traits to the directions and stuff like that, it pretty quickly turns into nonsense. However, as I said, I think it is a good and helpful model because it can do much more. It is a great relationship model and can also be a developmental model, as we will see. And this simple assigning of types is not actually the idea. Instead, we deal with a personal home ground and a personal focal point. Let's first discuss the home ground. Our behavior is not always the same. It is not uniform. It varies depending on where we are, who we are with, what requirements we face. In this example, let's say this is me. I lean towards closeness and I lean towards continuity. Now, let's say I have a job at a company that is rather traditional and conservative, and say they favor conservative values, and the interactions are supposed to be distant and professional. Superiors don't like if employees discuss personal matters, have personal conversations. Everything is supposed to be very professional, very distant. This could be perfectly fine for me, despite me being someone who leans towards closeness, because I might still be perfectly able to perform behavior, a distant behavior, to act in a distant way, to act as I am required to at this job. And I might not be unhappy about it. Maybe I have a great relationship, great family, and my great need for closeness is perfectly fulfilled there. And I'm perfectly fine with acting distant at work. And at the same time, I have this tendency towards continuity. And this works nicely with that job because a traditional conservative company, they value things like punctuality, reliability, and so do I. And they don't want the status quo to change, and this is perfectly fine for me. So things work out nicely there. Now, let's say I have some spare time at the weekend. I have a great need for continuity, but this is probably more than fulfilled at my work. I get more continuity there than I even need, so I have as much as I want. And when I have some spare time at the weekend, I might actually feel my need for change. And I might say, oh well, now at the weekend, I'd like some adventure and variety and try something new. And this, by the way, is one of the reasons why this personality type approach doesn't work very well, because if you, for example, say, oh, this person acted in a certain way, so they have to be this type, this obviously doesn't work very well. Now, our home ground describes our capabilities. It describes the options I have available. And this home ground can be enlarged. All of the areas, all of those 4 directions, they are of equal worth. They are all equal. None of them is better than the others. However, if I enlarge my home ground, I have more options available in my behavior. I have a larger scope of action available to me. And it is helpful to visualize it in this way, because we always tend to improve those things we are already good at. So here, if I am this person who leans towards continuity, I might like to read books about self-management and try to manage my risks better and things like that. Improve my planning and whatnot. And it might actually be more interesting and more fulfilling for me to take a step towards change, to try something new, to experiment, to do something without detailed planning, and just start, just do. So it can be, here the Riemann-Thomann model can be helpful as a developmental model. And then we have this personal focal point. This is my personal center, and it is important because this is the standard by which I measure others. Because this default cross of axes, this is pretty much meaningless in real life. For me, it looks like this, because I am the standard. I am the standard I measure others by. For example, since I lean towards continuity, I might believe that it is perfectly normal and a total no-brainer to adhere to formal written rules. Always adhere to formal written rules. This is something I wouldn't even question. Now, if a colleague comes around and tells me, yeah, well, but there are also unwritten rules and they should also be adhered to, I will probably say, oh, come on, this person is totally exaggerating. And then another colleague might come around and tell me, oh, well, I wouldn't adhere to all rules right away. I would first check if I really agree with them. And I would say, oh, this person is totally carefree. They should take it more seriously. So it doesn't really matter if this other person leans toward change or if they just lean toward continuity, not as much as myself. I am the standard I judge others by. And here we take a step towards the relationship model. Because those differences between us can lead to problems. And this is most obvious if the differences are rather big. Let's say I lean towards continuity and I lean towards distance. At work, I have to lead a project group together with a colleague. And this colleague of mine leans toward closeness and towards change. So they are my total opposite. They are totally different from myself. Now, this obviously will lead to problems. A cliché situation might look like this. They say, oh, we have to do a big meeting at the beginning of the project where everybody gets to know each other, and we should eat lunch together so we can also bond on a personal level, and maybe we should have a team building event soon. And in regard to the project, I'd say we just get started and figure stuff out along the way. Let's start doing things without a lot of planning. And I would probably be flabbergasted. I would say, oh, well, I've prepared an organizational chart I wanted to send to everybody via email, and in my book that is sufficient for getting to know each other. But regarding the planning, of course we need to do detailed planning. We need milestones and deadlines and risk management, and a project plan with less than 500 pages I wouldn't take seriously. So this will obviously lead to some issues. Now, let's imagine there are some organizational changes for whatever reason, and this colleague has to do something else and is replaced by another colleague. And this new colleague clearly leans towards distance and towards continuity, just like myself. So this should work out fine, shouldn't it? Well, at the beginning it probably would. We could show each other our charts and diagrams and write highly formal emails to each other, and we will get along just fine. But sooner or later it will become obvious that we are not exactly the same after all, and we will put the cross between us. Because sooner or later it will turn out that one of us leans a bit more towards continuity than the other, and one leans a bit more towards distance than the other. And one of us will say to the other, oh, you are overdoing it with the planning, you are too detailed, relax. Sorry. And the other will answer, oh, you are too carefree, get a grip on yourself, be more serious. And one of us might say to the other, oh, you are too cool and distant, you should be a bit more human. And the other will say, oh, you are much too affectionate, be more professional, please. So it doesn't really matter what type we are, where we are placed in this cross of axes at the beginning. What really matters is how we are different from the person we are interacting with. Because those differences can really matter, play an important role in our interactions. When opposites meet, a vicious circle can emerge. You probably remember the vicious circles model by Schulz von Thun that we discussed before. There, one of the typical examples was a relationship between one person who leans toward closeness and one person who leans toward distance. Let's say it's a fresh relationship and everybody is great and they both enjoy it. Now, suddenly, one evening, the distance partner tells the other, "Oh, today I would like to spend the evening on my own. I would like to have some time for myself." Now, the closeness partner will probably be this will probably make the closeness partner afraid. The closeness partner will think, "Oh no, they are moving away from me. They are withdrawing from me. Our relationship is deteriorating. Maybe they don't love me as much anymore." And they will try to act against it by pushing closeness even more, by trying to spend more time together, getting even closer to the other person, and probably pushing the other person even farther away. Maybe the distance partner will agree to more closeness. For example, will agree to spend the evening together after all, but will not be happy about it, will not feel good while doing it, and the relationship will still suffer. Now, the Riemann-Thomann model proposes another solution. It proposes getting closer through some kind of detour loop. If the closeness partner accepts the wish for distance and just says, "Oh well, yeah, okay, you can do it. It's fine if you want to spend the evening alone," then the distance partner will be able to meet their need for distance. And after this need is fulfilled, they will probably recognize their need for closeness again and will be able to move towards the partner on their own, will, for example, be able to spend time together again and be able to actually enjoy it. And this might seem a bit unintuitive at first, but this is really a good way to break the vicious circle here. I think as a relationship model, the Riemann-Thomann model is most useful, most helpful. At the end, let me say a few words about origins and sources. It is a bit confusing because the model has two people in the name, and I've mentioned Schulz von Thun, even though he doesn't seem to have anything to do with it. Well, the model is originally based on this book. It is called in German Die Grundformen der Angst. There is an English version called Anxiety Using Depth Psychology to Find Balance in Your Life by Fritz Riemann. In this book, the four tendencies I have described are explained. However, Riemann focuses on a negative. It is more negative. He doesn't describe the four directions as needs, but as anxieties, and he focuses on the negative effects that, according to him, we can suffer if we greatly exaggerate one direction. For example, way too much closeness can lead to a depressive personality, too much continuity to a compulsive one, too much distance to a schizoid personality, not to be confused with schizophrenic schizoid, and too much change can lead to a hysteric personality. Now, Riemann was a psychologist, but this is clearly not a scientific psychology book. Riemann also leans toward esoteric ideas. There is some astrology in the book, which is never a good sign. And this idea of a depressive personality and so on clearly has nothing to do with modern professional diagnosis of mental illnesses. Next, there is Christoph Thomann. Christoph Thomann is a colleague and friend of Schulz von Thun, and he is a great fan of this book by Riemann, and on this book by Riemann he based his own model. First he formulated these 4 directions in a positive way as closeness, continuity, distance, and change. And he formalized the model, he added the visualization, and he further developed it to a relationship model. And this is how the Riemann-Thomann model came to be. And he introduced it to Schulz von Thun, and Christoph Thomann is also part of the Schulz von Thun Institute, and so it became part of their toolbox. In the courses, in the seminars taught at the Schulz von Thun Institute, the Riemann-Thomann model is taught and is used. However, it is not described in the books by Schulz von Thun, because obviously in his own books he describes his own models and ideas. It is only described in the books by Thomann, which unfortunately are not available in English, same as the books by Schulz von Thun. And there is also a book specifically about the Riemann-Thomann model by one Nico Fleisch. However, again, this is unfortunately not available as an English translation. Well, subscribing to the channel probably means leaning towards continuity and giving the video a like, maybe closeness. I'm not sure. Best play it safe and do both. At least I would be very happy about it. Thanks a lot. We will see each other again next week. For today I'll take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.